Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, a pair of former miners found love shoveling coal and shaped a life making wooden spoons.
When we first started getting to know each other, the question we would ask is if you had anything in the world you wanted to do, what would be first on your list, with your life? And I said, I wanted to be a woodworker.
NASCAR Hall of Famer Leonard Wood shares stories and a bit of advice.
When you really want to make something and make it run, you just concentrate until you fix it.
And group bike rides are a way to socialize and get outside.
It's a little bit aspirational. It's a little bit ambitious. It's also helpful to remember and remind people that are not used to riding around that it's okay to walk.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. For 30 years, Sue and Stan Jennings have run Allegheny Treenware, a West Virginia company that makes wooden kitchen utensils. But they started off as a couple of coal miners, and when they weren't underground, they talked about what else they could be doing. Folkways reporter Capri Cafaro visited the Jennings and brings us this story.
I've just arrived at Allegheny Treenware's woodworking shop. I see one lone sign on this winding road that tells me I'm in the right place. Sue Jennings greets me with a welcoming smile and introduces me to her husband, Stan. Today, the couple is giving me a private tour of their business.
We make a spoon for you. It's part of our tour. So let's do the spoon then? We're going to go ahead and make the spoon?
Yeah, let's make the spoon.
We're going to actually make you one of our more popular items, which is a 10-inch granny spoon.
It looks like a typical wooden spoon you may find in your own grandmother's kitchen. Simple, clean lines, and durable. This one will be made of cherry wood. Each spoon starts with a pattern that is traced onto a board of wood and cut, just like a clothing pattern for fabric.
When we make the spoon or whatever, there's no duplicating machines, there's no computerized equipment. Everything is truly made by hand here at this shop.
Although Sue and Stan have learned how to make spoons through a lot of trial and error over the years, both of them can trace their passion for woodworking back to their childhood.
I was the daughter of a contractor, and so I grew up going with my father to the job all the time, and that was building homes. And I knew every tool he had. I was his gopher.
Well, I guess kind of like Sue, I had a little bit of woodworking in my DNA. My father, he had a sawmill, and he had a team of horses back then. They pulled the logs out with horses. But my grandfather, I spent a lot of time with him. He was a carpenter. And I learned a lot off of my grandfather.
When I met my husband, we were both working in the coal mines underground. And when we first started getting to know each other, the question we would ask is if you had anything in the world you wanted to do, what would be first on your list, with your life? And I said, I wanted to be a woodworker. And he had the same dream. So right off the bat, we knew there was something pretty special there.
The chance to chase their dreams of woodworking came sooner than expected. Not long after the couple met, Sue and Stan were laid off from the mines.
We all walked in and got our pink slips, and that was the end of our coal mining business. And that's how this evolved, because we needed a way to make a living.
To make ends meet, the couple started selling odds and ends at craft shows. During that time, both experimented with making spoons. Stan says the first set of spoons he made were less than impressive, but were created from the heart, and because he needed a cheap present.
I suppose I was too tight to buy a Christmas gift. But anyway, I made her a set of dogwood spoons. And that was actually the first set of spoons we made. I'm ashamed to even show people. They turned out so bad, but Sue hung on to them.
Yeah, I still got them. They're pretty precious. And they are a little clubby, in feel, but they're made out of dogwood, and it was my Christmas gift. So, heck yeah, I'm proud of them. The first spoon I made was a set of measuring spoons. And I made it out of rhododendron. And that's because we had gone to a show, and we met a spoon maker, and we talked about him. I was fascinated from the very beginning. And on the way home from that show, I said, what would be cool would be make some measuring spoons.
Sue and Stan discovered there was a whole culture around wooden utensils when they stumbled upon an old book called Treen. This book ended up changing the direction of their business, but they almost didn't buy it.
At the time, it was like a $50 book, and we stood there and agonized over spending $50 on this book because we couldn't afford a book for $50.
Treen is a Saxon word that refers to wooden items made from the tree for use in the kitchen or dairy. After buying the book, Allegheny Treenware was born. Much of the inspiration for their product design and the name of their business has come from the Treen book. Today, over 30 years later, the book is still on their shelves. It's thick and well-worn, filled with photos of wooden kitchen items. I can see the design connection between what's in the book and what Sue and Stan make today, both functional and beautiful. Over the years, the couple has grown as craftspeople thanks to a combination of grit and learning from other woodworkers. Now times are not as tight, and the process is much more sophisticated. They now have several employees and a workshop full of high-end equipment. Their Treenware is sold online all around the world, and the spoons are coveted collector's items. Today, there's a lot of action on the shop floor. Staff shift between workstations. Each is dedicated to a specific purpose. Sue introduces me to her team member, Chris, who is working on the bandsaw. He's beginning to shape the spoon.
He's got the spoon cut out already, so all he's going to do is he's going to flip it up on its side, and he's going to carve the curve in the head and the curve in the handle. We've got some shape now.
Next, Chris takes the spoon to the milling machine where he's going to trim and smooth the wood, a process called routing. But Sue and Stan reserve the most difficult part of the process for themselves, the shaping finish of the spoon. This requires very coarse sandpaper on a spinning belt, which can cut your hands if you're not careful.
So what he's doing right now, he's shaping the head of the spoon. He's going to make it symmetrical on all sides. And then he'll come over to the disc, and he's going to start removing any excess wood he can on the disc.
Sue says her approach to shaping is different from Stan's. She pre-shapes the spoon first, while Stan starts by planning things out before he sits down at a machine.
We're different sides of the brain, and we go about things differently. He's very methodical, and I'm not, but we end up in the same place.
Sue and Stan also have complementary skills as business partners, especially when they were selling at craft shows.
I'm always at the booth selling, and his job was to entertain. And he would do that. He'd be hand carving a spoon, and he'd be telling stories, entertaining the men while the women went shopping. It worked perfectly.
Before I get to take the spoon they made for me, they put some finishing touches on it. They burn their initials, S.J., into the spoon and then soak it in food-grade oil to bring out the color of the cherry wood. Now I get a spoon of my very own.
So there it is.
Oh my gosh.
Now you're going home with this. That's your spoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This spoon is much more than a wooden utensil. It represents the sweat equity of one couple who stayed true to their dreams and each other for over 3 decades. In Preston County, West Virginia, I'm Capri Cafaro for Inside Appalachia.
That story was part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. Find dozens more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. Stock car racing's roots run deep in Appalachia. Our twisty roads and dark hollers were the original proving grounds for moonshine runners, who sharpened their driving skills outrunning law enforcement. Some of those drivers became NASCAR's first stars when it formed in 1948. But NASCAR's oldest continuous racing team had nothing to do with moonshine. The Wood brothers began as shade tree mechanics, working beneath a beech tree in Patrick County, Virginia. They started running races in 1950. Glenn drove, while his brother Leonard worked on the cars, and was part of what was known as the most skilled pit crew in the world. Glenn passed away in 2019. The team is now run by his kids and grandkids. Leonard is 89, and he still works daily at the Wood Brothers Racing Museum in their hometown of Stewart. I dropped by to speak with him. So the first thing I kind of wanted to ask you is, I've had people tell me drivers help, but it's really mechanics that win races. Is that true?
It's both. You can have the best car in the world and, and the driver not do his job like he's supposed to. But, a good driver's a big credit to your winnings. But he can't carry it on his back, He's got to have something that'll perform, But I sort of rate it equal, one to the other.
Were you mechanically inclined as far back as you can remember in life, or was there a moment where it kind of clicked for you?
No, I was always mechanical in mind. I'd always tear my toys apart. And Brother Delano, his next Christmas, his is like brand new, and mine tore mine all to pieces. Back when I was just 12 years old, I was making little Jeeps out of wood, and then I made one that had a steering wheel on it, and I would come roaring down that hill, the back of the hill, and we used to have a bottle of oil, and we'd oil the axles, and put the wheels back on so they'd roll faster, and those little bottles were still buried up there, for a long time. And then I made a gasoline-powered go-kart when I was 13, and it's in the museum over there, and it's got a washing machine motor on it and all that. I remember when I was just a young thing, I told my dad I wanted something with a motor on it, and so then my sister's husband's dad had a washing machine with a gasoline motor on it, and when the electricity come along, he took the gasoline motor off, put an electric motor on it, and my brother-in-law gave me that motor. Then I made a go-kart out of it, powered the go-kart.
Oh, wow. So my 11-year-old loves tearing this stuff apart and sometimes builds it back together, sometimes not. What advice would you have for him?
Well, when you decide to make something, you do heavy concentration, and you stick to that until you get the thing done. You don't just do a little bit here and lay it down and all that. When you start to make something, concentrate hard on what you want to build and how you want to build it, and keep doing it till you get it fixed. I used to design cylinder head ports and intake manifolds and all that, and when I'd start, I'd just keep at it till I got it like I wanted it. And I didn't lay it down and forget about it. Come in next week and work on it. When you really want to make something and make it run, you just concentrate till you fix it. And I don't know at the times that I have thought of ways to do it, and something just triggers my mind how to do it. And then before I get done, something else triggers my mind. No, this is the way you do it, even better. I tell people, I know what I do know, and I also know what I don't know. And my dad always said, what he didn't know would make a great big book, and I feel the same way. But I do thank the Lord that the talent he gives me to do the things I do.
What's your next project?
Ed and Lynn always comes up with something me to do, so they decided have me to make a half-size 427 engine. And of course we started making it, and then we have a great machinist, Benny Belcher. To me, he's the greatest I've ever seen. He can take regular milling machines and turning lathes and all that and make it look like a CNC made it. But anyway, so he and I together, we made this 427 half size like we run Daytona. So Eddie tells Edsel Ford that what they're going to have me to do. And Edsel says, well, it'd be nice to have it to look like a 427 that won Le Mans in 1967. So that's what we ended up making, was the one like won the Le Mans race in 1967. And so anyway, then Edsel said, then we'll put it in the Ford Museum, so that's where it is now. So and now they decided they wanted to make a 429 Boss Hemi engine like David Pearson drove in the 71 Mercury. So we got that about 2/3 done right now. So
You keep busy, huh?
yeah, and we're going to make that one run. The one the Ford Museum, the manifold, all that's fixed, but it don't have any parts in it to make it run. But this one's going to run. So
I've thought about that famous Wood Brothers pit crew and how tight y'all had that system. Where did that come from? Was that like a combination of the mechanics applied to the pit crew and maybe some military background, or do you know?
we was at Charlotte in 1960, World 600, the very first one. And we had 2 cars, we prepared them, 2 Fords. So Fireball Roberts and Smokey Unique made a stop, changed 2 tires and fuel, took them 45 seconds. And John Cowley with Ford Motor Company told us, says, I think it's some time to be gained in the pits. So we started working on it. So right away we was down to 25 seconds with the same deal. So and then we just worked from there. I mean, so then, we would machine the studs, recess the end of them so you could put a lug nut on them and start the lugs, and then put a spring in the socket so whenever you went from one lug to the other, throw the socket out and all that. And now we got the tires changed. Now we're waiting on the jack to get up. It took about 12 pumps. So I enlarged the plunger so it only take like two strokes to jack the car up. So now I got the tires changed. Now the gas won't go in. So now we start working on the fuel system, streamlining that to where it improved the fuel flow, and now we got a quick pit stop. We was coming back from California, and we stopped down at Greenville, South Carolina, to fuel the truck and get a bite to eat. Brother Ray and I was in this little ton truck, and the race car was on an open trailer, and these people was fans all looking at it. We come out where it was 20 degrees. So cold, we didn't stand around and talk. We got in the truck, left. We get between Greenville and Charlotte. We had to stop in Charlotte, and this truck started vibrating and shaking, and Brother Ray said, you can even feel it in the roof. And I'm looking out the window to see if there's an airport by, what was warming up, or there's an airplane warming up, or whatever. And then it quit. And then we got up to Charlotte, and we had to exit off and started up again. And I look out the side glass, and the steam coming out the exhaust pipe of the race car. And so I told Ray, I said, stop this thing. I stopped and I went around, and I could see this silhouette of a human behind the windshield. I'm thinking, now, one of the crew members just pulled a trick on us and got in the car, and then I'm thinking, no, he ain't that dumb, as cold as it is. I look in there, and this guy's got Marvin's helmet on. I said, what do you think you're doing? He said, let's go. Anyway, we pulled him out, and then about that time a sheriff drives up, and we handed him over to the sheriff.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't know the guy. I don't know where he lived. I hadn't heard from him since. I would love to get to talk to him, but I don't know where he is or whatever happened to him.
Thank you very
Yes, sir.
much. It's been an honor talking to you.
Well, same here. You've been interesting.
I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'll take it. Coming up, WVPB's Chris Schultz explores the hilly streets of Morgantown, West Virginia on a bicycle. You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
Spring is here, and with it, lots of folks are heading out to the woods or the rivers, but one group in Morgantown, West Virginia is taking to the streets on their bicycles. WVPB's Chris Schultz grabbed his helmet and tagged along to explore a city in a new way.
On an unseasonably warm evening in March, just as the sun was setting across the Monongahela River, a group of about 20 gathers at the Hazel Ruby McQueen Park Amphitheater, ready to take to the streets on their bikes. There's a group of mountain bikers come down after work from Uniontown, Pennsylvania, to take part in the ride. There's two brothers on a tandem bicycle, a woman with LEDs woven through her wheel spokes, and me, starting to wonder if my single-speed bike is up to the task of climbing Morgantown's hills.
So follow me. Yeah, the route, I just finished it right before we came here. So
Drew Gatlin is the staff engineer for the city of Morgantown and one of the primary organizers of Morgantown's social rides.
It's just a good time on bikes, exploring Morgantown streets, essentially trying to spread the joy that I know, at least, to be riding on two wheels in Morgantown.
Unprepared after a winter indoors, I've arrived on a single-speed bike. That means I have no gears to shift to make climbing the route's hills easier. But Gatlin has assured me that despite its hills, Morgantown and the social rides in particular are relatively accessible.
If you want to get around town on a bike, you have to climb some hills. It's a little bit aspirational. It's a little bit ambitious. It's also helpful to remember and remind people that are not used to riding around that it's okay to walk as well. Get off your bike and just, push it up the hill a little bit.
Turn left onto 3rd Street.
So, fully prepared for the inevitability of walking my bike up a hill, the group sets off behind Gatlin, who has a large speaker strapped to the back of his bike from which he plays music and directions.
Okay, I'm walking up this hill now.
As we wind our way towards West Virginia University and start to climb some hills into the student neighborhood of Sunnyside, I start to wonder between gasping breaths why we aren't riding on Morgantown's miles of gently graded, car-free rail trails. Professionally, Gatlin says he's interested in ensuring people can get around town via any mode they choose, be that on foot, in a car, or of course on a bike.
Morgantown can feel pretty intimidating to ride around. My own motivations for the social ride, taking them on the streets, is really geared towards reminding people that it is possible to ride on the streets, that you can have a good time, if not on your own, at least in a group of people with some music and some whimsy.
Last year, the bicycling blog Ice Bikes ranked West Virginia as the 4th safest state for cyclists in the country based on low cyclist fatalities on roads. But analysis by the League of American Bicyclists showed less than 0.25% of commuters in the state biked to work in 2022. Gatlin says promoting bikes as a viable mode of transportation is an objective of the social rides, albeit a secondary one. Tonight's ride routes us through WVU's downtown campus, down Morgantown's High Street, and through a residential neighborhood until we're crossing the river into Westover. As we follow the river, there's momentarily no worry about hills. But when riding in West Virginia, you don't get to avoid hills, only take breaks from them. And after the evening's longest climb up an alley, a rider suddenly gets a flat.
Yeah, we always try to stay together. We don't want to lose anybody or drop anyone. That's why we have someone out in the back.
Rebecca Marshall recently moved to West Virginia from Massachusetts with her partner. For them, the social ride is literally that, a social event built around a physical activity.
In Morgantown, every place is hilly, so you're going to have to deal with hills, and I think it's great. That's why it's better to stick together, just in case people fall behind. People show up that are new to this and might not have the general fitness for it, and that's totally okay. We want everybody to show up no matter what. And I think, again, just sticking together is the most important part of social riding. That's the point.
Group rides are not a new concept, and according to some attendants of the current social rides, Morgantown even hosted a national series of social rides known as Critical Mass a few decades ago. More recently, Gatlin and others maintained a municipal bicycle board that gave rise to the current social rides, as well as supported a Confidence City cycling class at WVU and events at middle schools. Those efforts led to the city being awarded bronze ranking by the League of American Bicyclists in 2016. Like so many things, the bicycle board hasn't quite recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, something that actually helped promote the social rides.
As COVID hit, and as the community conscious, right, of what was safe and what felt safe developed, social rides were one of the only options that many people felt comfortable doing to socialize with their community.
After the flat is fixed, the group heads back across the river to the riverfront park where we started. After more than 12 miles, the ride is over, and participants like Ash Orr bask in the feeling of accomplishment, to be back on his bike after the winter, and to have an opportunity to do some road riding.
Morgantown is just, it's difficult to bike solo. I find, I try to pretty much use my bike only. I try not to use my car at all. But I found that I feel more secure and more confident when I'm going through downtown or just different smaller streets within Morgantown when I am with a group.
Orr came out on his electric bike, something Gatlin says he's seeing more of and can help lower the barrier to riding in the Mountain State. But ultimately, it's just a fun time.
It's a really great time to be with the community, bike around town, get to see parts of town we don't really get to see much. So it's just really nice being able to get together with folks like this. Social rides will set you free, so you got to come on out.
For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Chris Schultz in Morgantown.
We're lucky to have a thriving bike community here where I live, in Floyd County, Virginia. One of my neighbors even commutes on his bike daily along twisty mountain roads into town. So keep an eye out for bikes if you're driving, and share the road. In Western North Carolina, a new exhibit called Sovereignty recently opened at the Museum of the Cherokee People. The exhibit focuses on the autonomy of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Director of Education Dakota Brown is co-curator of the exhibit. BPR senior regional reporter Lily Knepp spoke with Brown as part of a panel at the Appalachian Studies Association conference in March. Here's an excerpt.
In all of our community listening sessions and our community committee that we had and going out and talking to community, one of the things that always comes up is sovereignty and maintaining our sovereignty and how we're going to do that and talking about sovereignty. And another question that we get all the time from our visitors, from our non-Cherokee or non-Native visitors that come in, is what is sovereignty? Or why do you guys get to have a casino? Or why do you have your own law enforcement? Or those kinds of questions. There's a lot of confusion about like why we have these things in our community. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do at the museum. We're trying to shift the way that we look at exhibits.
I think one of the really interesting kind of examples that kind of brings all these things together is the big sign when you come onto the Qualla boundary that says the Cherokee Reservation. Can you talk a little bit about that sign and how it's wrong?
When you come into Cherokee, there are some signs that say, "Welcome to the Cherokee Indian Reservation." And it was born out of sovereignty, which is why I do have love for those signs, even though they are wrong. And so the reason why they're wrong is that we actually aren't a reservation. The Eastern Band of Cherokee, unlike most other tribal nations, do not live on a reservation. Our land base is called the Qualla Boundary. And it's called a Qualla Boundary because after the removal period of the 1830s, caused from the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Cherokees that remained in the East, we bought back all of the land that we currently have. So we purchased back all of our own land to be able to have our communities where they are. A reservation typically in a traditional sense is land that was given, and I like quote, I know you can't hear me on the radio, but like quotation given to tribes to live on. And some reservations acted almost like concentration camps. Folks had to have permission to leave or go off of them. People had to have like slips to go onto reservations.
And then like the rations, like ration cards, like literally everything was controlled, including the food.
Yes, by the government. And there's some things that come out of that we still do, like fry bread comes out of those times and comes out of like rationing for reservations and things like that. But for the Eastern Band in particular, that was not our story. However, the reason why we have those signs is during the mid-20th century when we're creating this tourist economy there was expectations that non-native visitors brought. So the types of tourists that were coming in there were non-native visitors. And they had these Hollywood stereotypical expectations of what they were supposed to see when they came to an Indian community that didn't really align with Cherokee culture and Cherokee identity at the time. Community reservation, right, the Cherokee Indian Reservation, was a very strategic move. It was branding. And it was creating a brand for our community to build an economy off of. And so I do have love for those signs. I hope that at some point they do come down because they aren't correct. And I do think that sometimes even our own community doesn't realize the history behind those signs and why it says that we're a reservation when we're not. Because a lot of people had to fight for our land and for us to have a koala boundary. How incredibly inspiring is that as a young Cherokee person to see these amazing, smart, intelligent, very innovative individuals that we come from. And so I hope for our community that they see those things and that they feel inspired to continue to fight for our sovereignty.
That was an excerpt from a conversation held at the Appalachian Studies Association conference at Western Carolina University in March. You can hear the entire recording online at bpr.org. We also featured Lily Knepp and Dakota Brown on an episode earlier this year, all about Foxfire and its work preserving Appalachian culture. Check that out on our website, wvpublic.org/Inside Appalachia. Indigenous people, like the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, are the bearers of the deepest-rooted cultural traditions in the region. In 2020, Folkways reporter Rachel Green visited with 2 basket weavers with the tribe, who told her about changes in their art form and what they were doing to keep their craft alive. Here's that story.
Some artists hone their skills in classrooms. Others, like Betty Maney, are practically born into their art.
When you live in something, you just know the process.
Betty is a small woman with a kind, round face and short gray hair. She's a renowned weaver of white oak and river cane baskets and a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Like many other Cherokee basket makers, she learned her art by watching her mother, shadowing her as she gathered materials.
When Mom went out to cut her tree down, we went with her. You know, we were with her in everything that she did.
Betty and her siblings were also there when their mom cut the tree into splints. Betty remembers her mom would lay a scrap of blue jean fabric on her lap and whittle the splints down until they were smooth and ready to be dyed and woven. Betty, who works out of her home studio in Cherokee, North Carolina, started making baskets in the mid-1990s. Her mom, Geraldine Walkingstick, was a well-known basket maker. She encouraged Betty to pick up basketry too.
One day my mom said, you need to start making baskets, because if you don't start making and learning how to weave baskets, it's going to die out.
Weaving also allowed Betty to make extra money for her family. She got her start with white oak, her mom's signature material, and she was a natural.
Looking back, I realized that it's amazing how I already knew. Mom didn't have to sit down and say, okay, this is how you lay your splints out, and this is how you have to go over and under one.
During the 1930s, ethnographers identified nearly 24 basket patterns traditionally woven by the Eastern Band of Cherokee. The patterns are geometrical and can be somewhat abstract. The flowing water pattern, for example, is made of intersecting splints that zigzag up the side of a basket. Many are dyed with plants like walnut or butternut bark to create color contrast.
Here's some of the butternut.
Betty relies on that contrast to create her distinct and precise patterns.
And this is the spiral lid that I'm using to make the lid for this one.
She likes symmetry and uses different colored splints to repeat certain elements like vertical lines or bands that encircle the basket.
What I like to do is do a band around the bottom. And as I weave up, I put a separation in there by repeating a specific design with some colors.
They're usually oval or vase-shaped, sometimes with lids, sometimes with handles. It's all up to the basket maker.
And then I will repeat the bottom design on the top. So it's real distinctive when you look at it.
And for Betty, the patterns are a continuation of her mother's legacy.
My mom's designs that she used in her basket still live through me and my sister. To us, that's keeping her work alive.
But Betty finds ways to put her own spin on what she learned from her mom, too.
I call what I do contemporary cultural art because it's always an improvement. You're always coming up with something different. You're always making things your own.
You can't make these baskets just anywhere. Many of the materials used, like river cane or bloodroot, are native to the southeastern United States.
It's just something that's important to the Cherokee, to our culture, because it identifies who we are, what we do, and why it's important to us. That was our way of life. That's how we survived.
Betty started making baskets during a craft revival in the 1990s. By then, baskets were mostly sold in craft stores to tourists or entered in competitions. In the past, though, Betty says they were mostly utilitarian.
When I was little, we still needed them for fish baskets, and the small square ones were used as a sieve in the hominy making process to rinse the ash out of the hominy. And then the handle baskets were used for gathering and storage.
The tourism industry started growing in Cherokee after the nearby Blue Ridge Parkway was completed in 1936. Although baskets were still used in everyday life, basket makers also began selling them to tourists during the busy summer months. Basket making plays an important role in Cherokee's economy, but pressure from tourism and increased land development made it more difficult to find basket making materials in the wild.
The resources, the natural resources, became scarce. And that was largely due to private landowners and development. Like the river cane that grows along the cornfields, farmers were just plowing it up and burning it.
And Betty isn't the only artist to feel the effects of this scarcity. Faye Junaluska is a basket maker with 40 years experience who has also had trouble sourcing her materials. Faye comes from a long line of basket makers.
There's my great-grandma, my grandma, my mother, and me, so I'm a fourth generation myself.
Like Betty, she learned the art from her mother, Emma Squirrel Taylor, whose work was even displayed in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Both Betty and Faye work with white oak, which is harvested as a sapling when it doesn't have many knots or branches. It takes a skilled hand to determine if a white oak tree is suitable for a basket. You don't really know if a tree is usable until you cut it down and look inside. Faye says,
Today, on the reservation, you can't find too much white oak.
River cane can also be tough to find. The bamboo species is native to southern Appalachia and grows in large patches called cane brakes. It's also used to make dart guns, a Cherokee weapon, and floor mats. Faye doesn't remember a time when the river cane grew nearby.
I've never heard my mother talk about going out and gathering cane or the women gathering cane here somewhere.
So Faye and her mother had to find new ways to get their materials instead. This usually meant going outside Cherokee or bartering with other artisans. For example, if she knows someone who has white oak on their property,
maybe do trade out, might pay for a tree if they want a basket, then I'd trade out on a basket.
Betty has also found ways to cope with scarcity. She uses bloodroot, tiny white flowers that only bloom in early spring, to dye her basket splints a vibrant red. But to get that color, the petals need to be fresh. So after harvesting,
we have learned to clean it really, really good and wash all the dirt off, put it in freezer bags, and we can freeze it. And it's still fresh.
A local nonprofit has stepped in to help too. Revitalization of Traditional Cherokee Artisan Resources, or RTCAR, was founded in 2005 by the Cherokee Preservation Foundation to help protect and preserve resources for Cherokee artists. One of their programs connects artists, including Betty, with landowners who have materials they can use. Now, once a year, Betty and other basket makers go all the way to Kentucky to gather river cane through a connection made by RTCAR. Finding ways to cope with scarcity is crucial for the survival of basket making. It also relies on strong communities and people who work to keep the tradition alive.
Because you've got so many different community members, family members involved in the process, it passes on that knowledge to them. That way it stays alive.
There have been many times that a basket-making technique nearly went extinct. But each time, the Cherokee community saved it by teaching and ushering in new generations of basket makers. Betty was one of those novices once, but now she finds herself on the other side of the exchange.
When somebody asks me how to make a basket, I'm happy to share.
For Inside Appalachia, I'm Rachel Green in Cherokee, North Carolina.
The federal government is putting money behind a variety of approaches to slowing climate change. One of them that's attracting a lot of interest from the petrochemical industry is to capture carbon dioxide emissions before they reach the atmosphere. In northern Appalachia, a new project would capture CO2 and transport it to underground storage wells in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. The Allegheny Front's Julie Grant reports.
Landmen are knocking on doors again, but this time it's not for oil and gas development. It's to lease land for wells to store carbon underground. The Nebraska-based company NASCAR is developing a project in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio that it calls the Tri-State CCS Hub.
My name is Brett Estep. I'm the Vice President of Development for NASCAR, and I lead our carbon capture and sequestration initiative.
Estep explains that their potential customers would be fossil fuel heavy industrial facilities like gas power plants and steel manufacturers interested in reducing their carbon dioxide emissions. There are tax incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for each ton of carbon a facility captures and stores. It's part of the federal plan to deal with the climate crisis. Estep says its customers will capture their own CO2 emissions, and NASCAR will build the pipelines to transport it to underground storage wells in rural areas.
That's our business model, is that transport and storage piece.
NASCAR and other partners are negotiating for up to $69 million from the Department of Energy for project development. Estep says NASCAR plans to drill 15 to 20 storage wells where it will inject the CO2. Their target is to store 5 million metric tons annually. Estep says they've had overwhelming response from companies that want this service. Now they need rights from property owners so they can build injection wells on the surface and store the carbon thousands of feet underground.
So we're in what I would call the sort of mid-stage of development. We're actively negotiating with landowners for pore space rights, so the real estate right deep underground to store the CO2.
I'm going to give you enough information and things to get started.
The Ohio Farm Bureau has held meetings in eastern counties where landowners are being approached for this project.
Probably ask some pressing questions of some of the developers that are coming to your community with regard to this.
Retired Marine and police officer Ed Hashberger attended one of them. He says a few years ago, he would have been excited by a new industry like this.
I'm a diehard Republican, okay?
He and his wife have been raising chickens and enjoying the wildlife at their hilltop home with a view looking across the valley. When an energy company came knocking on his door a few years ago, Hashberger was into it.
Because drill, baby, drill. You know, we have resources here. Let's take advantage of it.
But the Hashbergers also wanted to protect the air, land, and water, so they teamed up with neighbors to get environmental protections in their gas leases. But as this whole new CO2 industry moves in, Hashberger has concerns.
You're actually going to put this stuff in the ground. What could happen if we have an accident? What can we do to mitigate these situations as they arise?
He worries about an accident like the one in rural Mississippi in 2020 when a carbon dioxide pipeline ruptured. At least 45 people were hospitalized. Many were unable to breathe. Some lay on the ground unconscious, and cars wouldn't work, so it hampered emergency response. Hashberger looks down from his home to the houses that sit along the creek.
What about the small subdivisions of the communities that are around these injection wells? God forbid that one of them burp up and release that gas and settle down there.
Neeraj Gupta is a researcher at Battelle, an independent nonprofit institute in Columbus. He's been looking into carbon capture and storage for 2 decades.
That's the biggest objective, is make sure that it does not leak out.
He says the carbon dioxide is compressed and then injected into porous underground rock layers, capped by a layer of impervious rock like shale to prevent leakage.
That's why we do go through very detailed characterization, seismic surveys, well testing, reservoir modeling.
Gupta explains that drillers have been safely injecting CO2 into underground rock for 50 years in a process called enhanced oil recovery. But injecting carbon into rocks and keeping it there permanently, essentially forever, is a newer idea. Gupta points to a project in Illinois that's been in operation since 2015 and one in Norway as evidence that carbon storage works.
I think we have shown that, it can be done, it can be monitored, and that pilot test work, experimental work, has been used by EPA to develop the current regulations.
In most states, it's the EPA that issues permits for CO2 injection wells. Currently, it has only 8 permits in the whole country. But the tax incentives are driving new interest, and the agency is considering 127 new wells. Still, that's just a drop in the bucket of how much storage would be needed to make a dent in U.S. carbon emissions. So far, there are no permit applications in the tri-state region targeted by NASCAR, but the company says it will submit plans to the EPA in the next month or two for wells in Hancock County, West Virginia.
So the question is, how good are these plans at making sure that the carbon that's pushed underground is contained?
Eric Schaefer is executive director of the nonprofit Environmental Integrity Project, which looked into EPA's permitting process. He says the permit application asks how the company will assure the carbon stays underground and how often it will monitor the wells.
It turns out there's no wrong answer to the question. It's kind of whatever the industry says.
He's concerned that once the storage capacity is full at a site, companies will just walk away.
One of the disturbing things we saw is you finish up the project and within some cases 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you stop monitoring. You're pretty much, lock the door and leave.
Schaefer says if the carbon seeps out into the atmosphere, it not only presents possible dangers, it also defeats the purpose of spending all that public money to slow down climate change. For the Allegheny Front, I'm Julie Grant.
For better or worse, the fortunes of Appalachia's coal industry are shaped by what happens outside the region. And that's what's happening with the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed when a cargo ship slammed into it in late March. The bridge collapse resulted in the closure of the Port of Baltimore to most shipping, and that has affected coal producers, particularly in northern Appalachia. WVPB's Curtis Tate takes a deeper look.
The Port of Baltimore exported 28 million tons of coal last year, about half of it from West Virginia. After a container ship struck the Francis Scott Key Highway Bridge in March, collapsing the structure, Baltimore Harbor's coal piers have been cut off from the rest of the world. For now, the companies that produce the coal will have to find a way to other ports, mainly Norfolk or the Gulf Coast. If not, customers in India, China, Japan, and South Korea, among others, may have to turn to alternative sources. John Saldana, a professor of global supply chain management at West Virginia University, said Baltimore is the second largest U.S. export port for coal behind Norfolk, accounting for about a fifth of U.S. coal exports. He said even if Norfolk and other ports have the capacity to absorb coal shipments that would otherwise come through Baltimore, it will raise shipping costs. That includes more train crews, more rail cars and locomotives, and more space to store the coal on the ground at another port.
In the short run, immediately, clearly there's going to be an increase in transportation costs. And depending upon what capacity the rail carriers can find and how much diversion capacity the rail carriers find both on their transportation networks as well as at the ocean piers, that is going to tell whether the coal producers will actually have to throttle back on their production in the short run. Because if they continue producing at current rates and there is no way to load that coal onto rail cars and for those rail cars to go to the port and there is no capacity at the port, then clearly that will require the coal producers to throttle back on production.
Saldana said in ordinary times, northern Appalachian coal from West Virginia and Pennsylvania is closer to the port of Baltimore. Now that that's been disrupted, even temporarily, producers may take a look at whether they need to consider an alternative.
Given that Baltimore and its proximity to the northern Appalachian coal basin might have been attractive from a transportation cost standpoint, but putting all your eggs in one basket, shipping everything out through the port of Baltimore, of course, such black swan events nobody can anticipate, but then you always want to hedge. And if you have all of your eggs in one basket and you're exporting everything through one single export port, then if anything happens either to the transportation links to that port, within the port, or coming out of that port, that is going to disable your operation, or at least hobble your operation in the short run.
Also ordinarily, mid-Atlantic ports are closer to markets in Asia through the Suez Canal. But recent turmoil in the Middle East has caused the diversion of ocean-going vessels around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. Saldana said that gives Gulf Coast ports an advantage.
So normally, coming from Port of Baltimore, it would have been a lot more easier to go into the Suez Canal. But now, because of the Red Sea and the Houthi rebels affecting shipping over there, all the ships, so going down from the Gulf of Mexico to the Cape, that might actually even be a little bit more competitive compared to coming out of the East Coast, given that several shipping companies are opting to route their ships around the Cape.
Even if Asian customers may need to consider sourcing coal from elsewhere, Australia, for example, Saldana said they still prefer northern Appalachian coal because of its quality.
So I think in the long run, the northern Appalachian Basin coal provides a superior product to the other coal sources. But in the short run, there are definitely substitutes that are available that, while not of the same quality, would definitely fill the need.
Federal, state, and local officials have said their first priority is to reopen the Port of Baltimore. But they will have to remove all the pieces of the fallen bridge from the water, and that's not a small task. Saldana said the port may not reopen for weeks, if not months. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Curtis Tate.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by the Dirty River Boys, Charlie McCoy, John Blissard, Sierra Farrell, and John Ingram. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editors Nicole Musgrave, Mallory No Pain, and Catherine Moore. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.